21:30, on the 24th of October 1942, under a full moon at Guadalcanal, a former golf caddy manned 2 water-cooled machine guns alone by dawn. The rain stopped just before nightfall. Clouds broke apart, and the full moon flooded the southern approaches to Henderson Field with pale light. In most jungle fighting, visibility died at 10 meters. That night, Basilone could see shapes moving 100 meters out, dark figures threading through the trees. The advantage was temporary, and both sides knew it. After 21:30, the first Japanese assault surged forward. Hundreds of men advanced in tight formation, bayonets fixed, moving fast enough to overwhelm positions before defenders could react. It was a tactic built on shock and courage. Against rifles alone, it sometimes worked. Against properly sighted, heavy machine guns, it was catastrophic. Basilone opened fire in long, controlled bursts. The Browning's water-cooled barrel allowed sustained fire that would have destroyed lighter weapons in minutes. Tracer rounds cut visible paths through the night, walking the fire into the center of the advancing mass. Men fell in rows. The survivors dropped to the ground or turned back toward the jungle, dragging wounded with them. The pause lasted minutes. Then the second wave came from a slightly different angle, probing for a gap. Basilone shifted fire, coordinating with the other guns in his section so that no lane remained uncovered. Each weapon supported the next, overlapping fields of fire like interlocking gears. The attackers had nowhere to maneuver. Grenades exploded harmlessly short of the wire. Machine gun fire from the jungle died as soon as it revealed itself. 23, the pattern was clear. The Japanese attacked in waves. Basilone answered each one with disciplined fire, never emptying belts too fast, never letting the barrels spike beyond control. Ammunition handlers fed belts forward, hands blistered, shoulders aching, while spent casings piled at their feet. The jungle in front of the gun pits became a strip of open ground filled with bodies. Hours passed without relief. The moon remained high. Each assault was larger, more desperate, and closer than the last. Basilone did not chase targets. He waited until movement committed, then cut it down. The guns stayed alive. For now, the line held, but the night was only half over. Appanese assault was broken, and only 3 Marines were still standing. Sometime after 2, the night finally turned against them. Appanese mortar round landed directly on one of the gun pits. The explosion erased it in an instant. 8 Marines were killed or wounded where they stood. 1 machine gun was gone, another damaged beyond immediate repair. In seconds, Basilone's 4-gun section was reduced to 2 functioning weapons and fewer than half its men. Assaults did not stop. Crisis. Hours of sustained fire had burned through thousands of rounds. The remaining belts stacked beside the guns were almost gone, and the nearest ammunition dump sat more than 180 meters behind the line across open ground, fully illuminated by moonlight, swept by Japanese machine guns that had crept forward during the fighting. Guns went silent. Even for minutes, the line would break. Basilone made the decision without discussion. He left the gun pit and ran. Tracer fire chased him across the open ground. He dove into shell craters, rolled, stood, and kept moving. At the dump, he seized 2 ammunition cans over 60 pounds of belted 30-06 and ran back the same way. Slipping in mud, bullets snapping past where his head had been seconds earlier. He made the trip again, and again. One run, he lost his asbestos gloves. They were essential. Without them, no one could touch the superheated metal of a Browning that had been firing for hours. But there was no time to search. When one gun began to malfunction from heat and fouling, Basilone stayed on it anyway. He used wet rags torn from the water jacket to protect his hands where he could. Where he couldn't, he burned. Blisters formed as he worked the mechanism by feel, clearing stoppages, forcing the gun back into action, while Japanese soldiers gathered less than 50 meters away for another push. He did not shut the weapon down. He could not. The next wave surged forward. Both guns opened fire again. They were still holding, but now the cost was being paid in skin, blood, and exhaustion, minute by minute, with no margin left. By 3:30, the attacks changed. The Japanese no longer advanced in mass. Small groups moved low through the bodies and shell holes, probing closer with grenades, trying to reach the wire before the guns could traverse. The distance collapsed from 100 meters to 50, then less. Every second of silence invited a rush. The two remaining guns began to fail. Heat warped metal tolerances. The feed hesitated. A stoppage locked the action halfway open. Under training conditions, the procedure was clear: shut down, cool the gun, change the barrel, reset. Under fire, that procedure meant death. Alone stayed on the weapon against hot steel, forcing the mechanism forward, clearing the jam by touch rather than sight. Wet rags steamed, skin stuck and tore. He did not release the grip. When the gun came back into battery, he fired immediately, sweeping the approach where shapes were already rising from the ground. The next assault came just before dawn. Throwing grenades blindly, trying to overwhelm the pits by proximity. Basilone alternated fire between the two guns, never letting both fall silent at once. When one overheated, the other spoke. When one jammed, he beat it back to life. Ammunition belts ran empty and were replaced mid-burst, hands shaking from exhaustion. No sense of time anymore, only function. Fire, reload, clear, fire again. The eastern sky began to lighten. The attacks thinned, then stopped altogether. The jungle went still. No movement, no shouts, just smoke, burned cordite, and the low metallic ticking of cooling guns. Relief finally arrived. After sunrise, they counted the section. 16 men had begun the night. 3 were still standing. Hands swollen and blistered, eyes fixed forward, unwilling to step away until someone physically took his place. After sunrise, the scale of what had happened became visible. In front of the gun pits, the ground was carpeted with bodies. Japanese soldiers lay stacked where each assault had broken, some only meters from the wire. The jungle edge that had hidden thousands of men the night before was silent and empty. The attack had collapsed completely. Reinforcements from the 164th Infantry Regiment moved into the line. They counted ammunition, they counted weapons, then they counted men. In Basilone's section, 13 Marines were dead or wounded badly enough to be evacuated. 3 remained. Basilone was one of them. Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller walked the position later that morning. He said nothing at first. He looked at the destroyed gun pit, the burned barrels, the spent belts piled knee-high, and the bodies beyond the wire. He made notes. That was all. Numbers told the rest. In that sector alone, hundreds of Japanese soldiers had been killed. Across the perimeter, thousands were dead or wounded. Henderson Field still stood. Aircraft would still fly. The campaign would continue. Basilone was evacuated only after orders were repeated. His hands were wrapped. Second-degree burns covered his palms and forearms. He had not slept, eaten, or left the guns for more than 10 hours. He had carried ammunition under fire, repaired overheated weapons without protection, and kept 2 machine guns firing when stopping for even a minute would have meant collapse. Later, the citation would say he showed the courage of a veteran. The truth was simpler. He understood his weapon, his ground, and his responsibility, and he refused to let the guns fall silent, no matter the cost. The night at Henderson Field did not end when the firing stopped. It followed John Basilone long after the barrels cooled and the bodies were counted, because what happened there was not just a fight, it was a demonstration of how modern war actually worked when theory collided with exhaustion, fear, and mechanical limits. Outside, The battle would later be summarized with numbers. Waves repelled, casualties inflicted, positions held. Those figures mattered to planners and historians, but they concealed the real mechanism of survival. The line did not hold because of courage alone. It held because one man understood that in industrial warfare, momentum mattered more than heroics, and silence was more dangerous than death. Machine guns were not glamorous weapons. They were not precise instruments of individual skill like rifles, nor symbols of speed like aircraft or tanks. They were machines designed to function under abuse, to convert ammunition into time bought for other men to survive, maneuver, and breathe. Basilone treated them that way, not as extensions of ego, but as systems that needed feeding, cooling, and attention without pause. The section was cut in half. He did not reassess the situation philosophically. He did not wait for orders or relief that might never come. He reduced the problem to fundamentals: ammunition, heat, and continuity of fire. Everything else burns. Exposure, fear became secondary variables. If the guns stayed alive, the line stayed alive. If the guns went silent, everything ended. Logic is uncomfortable because it strips heroism of romance. There was no dramatic charge, no single decisive shot. There was repetition, running the same ground under fire again and again, clearing the same jam with less skin each time, feeding belts into weapons already past their designed limits. War at that scale was not about brilliance. It was about refusing to stop performing basic functions when the human body demanded rest. Japanese soldiers attacking that night were not cowards nor fools. They were disciplined veterans executing a doctrine that had worked elsewhere. Shock, speed, and moral pressure had broken defenses before. What they encountered at Henderson Field was not superior spirit, but superior systems. Overlapping fire, water-cooled barrels, ammunition stockpiled forward. Men trained not just to shoot, but to maintain machines under stress. The part of war that rarely appears in propaganda. Victory came not from hatred or ideology, but from logistics and endurance. Basilone's background mattered not because it made him brave, but because it had conditioned him to carry weight, tolerate discomfort, and notice when equipment was about to fail. Civilian skills translated directly into battlefield survival. At Guadalcanal, Basilone was removed from combat and turned into a symbol. Crowds cheered him. Newspapers simplified him. The machine guns disappeared from the story. The burns were hidden under bandages and uniforms. The public wanted heroes, not lessons in thermal limits and belt feed rates. Basilone understood the difference. It was one reason he asked to go back. Returned to combat years later, he did not survive the war. There was no symmetry, no reward system that balanced sacrifice with survival. That, too, was part of the lesson. War does not keep accounts fairly. It spends people when necessary and forgets them when convenient. Night at Henderson Field mattered long after the men who fought it were gone. It demonstrated something fundamental, that in modern warfare, victory often belongs to those who keep systems functioning 1 minute longer than the enemy expects. The margin between collapse and survival can be measured in seconds of sustained fire, in a single belt that arrives just in time, in a gun that jams and is forced back into action by burned hands. Basilone did not invent a new tactic. He did not outthink an enemy commander. He simply refused to allow failure in the one place where failure was not permitted. That refusal held an airfield. That airfield held aircraft. Those aircraft shaped a campaign. History often searches for turning points in grand strategies and famous speeches. Sometimes the real turning point is quieter. A machine gun that does not fall silent when it should, operated by a man who understands that stopping even briefly is not an option. What the two-gun trick really was. Not a trick at all, but the brutal arithmetic of war, solved one belt, one jam, one burned hand at a time. What Henderson Field revealed more than anything else was the fragile illusion people carry about control in war. From a distance, battles look planned. Maps show arrows. Timelines imply order. But inside the perimeter that night, nothing was orderly. There was only a shrinking margin between function and collapse, measured in heat, fatigue, and how long metal could be forced to behave like metal. The machine gun was built to tolerate abuse, but it was never meant to be operated continuously by burned hands, without gloves, under uninterrupted pressure. Its designers assumed pauses, relief crews, spare barrels, safe handling procedures. Basilone stripped all of that away, not out of recklessness, but because the environment erased every safety buffer at once. War did not respect design assumptions. It punished them. A pattern repeated across the entire conflict. Equipment worked brilliantly until circumstances demanded more than doctrine allowed. Tanks bogged where terrain models said they should pass. Aircraft failed at altitudes engineers said were safe. Radios went silent in weather planners dismissed as unlikely. The men who survived longest were not those who believed the manuals, but those who understood where the manuals ended. Basilone's behavior that night was not extraordinary because it was fearless. It was extraordinary because it was adaptive. He recognized early that the fight had crossed a threshold where preservation no longer mattered. Once that line was crossed, conserving himself would not increase his odds of survival. It would only guarantee failure. So he chose the only variable still under his control: continuity. Warfare rewards that kind of thinking brutally. The side that keeps its systems functioning slightly longer gains exponential advantage. One machine gun, holding 5 extra minutes, forces attackers to bunch, stall, and expose themselves. Those minutes compound into hours. Hours compound into dawn. Dawn compounds into aircraft overhead, reinforcements arriving, and the enemy withdrawing. None of that is visible in the moment. In the moment, it feels like standing still while everything collapses around you. That's why individual endurance still mattered in an age of mass production and mechanization. Industry created the tools, but humans bridged the gaps when those tools reached their limits. Basilone was not unique in that role. Across the war, countless unnamed soldiers did the same thing in obscurity, keeping radios alive, with improvised wiring, feeding guns long past exhaustion, hand-cranking artillery sights when power failed. Most were never recorded. The difference in Basilone's case was scale. His refusal to stop occurred at a point where stopping would have altered a campaign. Also a harder lesson embedded in his story. Success in war often requires actions that would be unacceptable anywhere else. Deliberately burning one's own hands to keep machinery functioning is not bravery in civilian life. It would be seen as irrational, even pathological. In war, it becomes rational behavior under extreme constraint. That does not make it admirable in the moral sense. It makes it effective. This is why war leaves such deep psychological scars. The behaviors required to survive it are incompatible with normal human values. Basilone could function that night because he reduced his world to mechanics and tasks, but no one can live permanently in that state. When the fighting stopped, the nervous system does not simply switch off. The body remembers the heat, the noise, the impossibility of rest. After Guadalcanal, Basilone was removed precisely because the institution understood this. Even if it rarely admitted it, symbols are easier to manage than survivors. A man who becomes a public hero cannot be allowed to break publicly. So he was moved, paraded, protected. Yet even then, the system failed him in a different way. It could not reconcile his identity as a symbol with his identity as a machine gunner. He wanted to return to the only environment where his skills made complete sense. The decision cost him his life. Later as tragic irony or noble fate, that interpretation is comfortable but misleading. His death was not the payment for earlier heroism. It was the continuation of the same logic that governed Henderson Field. When the system again demanded function over preservation, he answered the same way. This time, the margin ran out. In the end, Bazilone's story is not about killing counts or medals. It is about the narrow space where human endurance intersects with mechanical limits. War is decided there far more often than in command tents or strategy rooms. The outcome depends on who holds that line longest, not physically, but functionally. The two-gun trick was never a trick. It was an acceptance of reality. Guns fail, men fail, ammunition runs out. When all of those failures converge at once, victory belongs to whoever refuses to let the final failure occur. Refusal does not look heroic in the moment. It looks like stubbornness, repetition, and pain endured without ceremony. It looks like staying when leaving would be easier. And when it works, history compresses it into a citation and moves on. One night on Guadalcanal, that refusal kept an airfield alive, and that was enough to change everything that followed. War is often explained through courage, ideology, or leadership, but those explanations collapse when examined at ground level. At Henderson Field, the battle was not decided by speeches, flags, or belief. It was decided by whether a machine gun stopped firing or not. Everything else, strategy, morale, even survival, hung on that single mechanical fact. Basilone did not hold the line because he was fearless. He held it because he understood something most people never have to confront. In industrial warfare, the moment a system fails, people die immediately. There is no grace period. There is no recovery window. Silence is lethal. Browning machine guns in front of Henderson Field were not symbols. They were time machines. Every second they fired denied the enemy movement. Every pause allowed the enemy to advance. 30 seconds of silence meant 30 meters gained. 30 meters meant grenades. Grenades meant collapsed gun pits. Once that sequence started, no amount of courage could reverse it. Why Basilone's actions that night look inhuman when described calmly. Running ammunition under machine gun fire was not bravery in the romantic sense. It was systems maintenance under hostile conditions. Burning his hands on overheated metal was not heroism. It was emergency repair when no replacement parts existed. He was not trying to win. He was trying to prevent failure. War punishes hesitation more harshly than fear. Fear can exist alongside function. Hesitation cannot. Basilone did not suppress fear. He bypassed it by reducing the situation to tasks. Feed, clear, fire, move, ammunition, repeat. When his gloves were lost, the system demanded skin instead. He provided it. This is the brutal truth about mechanized war. Humans become consumable components when redundancy disappears. Training manuals assume relief crews, spare barrels, cooling intervals, and safety procedures. Combat removes all of them at once. When that happens, doctrine ends and adaptation begins. Those who cannot adapt are eliminated quickly, regardless of courage. Japanese soldiers attacking that night were not irrational. They were following a doctrine that valued shock, momentum, and moral pressure. That doctrine had worked before. What it could not overcome was sustained, overlapping fire delivered by weapons designed for continuous operation. Spirit could not outrun ballistics. Willpower could not cross beaten zones faster than machine guns could traverse. Field exposes a deeply uncomfortable lesson. Wars are often won by the side whose systems degrade more slowly, not by the side that believes more strongly. Industrial capacity creates weapons, but human endurance bridges the gap when those weapons reach their limits. Basilone's civilian life mattered not because it made him virtuous, but because it made him tolerant of weight, discomfort, and repetitive labor under pressure. For the battle, the narrative shifted. The machine guns disappeared from public memory. The burns were hidden. The system that nearly consumed him transformed him into a symbol because symbols are easier to manage than survivors. A symbol does not shake, does not question, does not remember heat and noise. A human does. Stallone later insisted on returning to combat. It confused people who wanted a cleaner story. But psychologically, it made sense. In war, his internal logic matched the environment. Sacrifice produced immediate, visible results. Effort had direct consequences. In peace, that logic had no place. The skills that kept him alive under fire had no civilian application. The system that shaped him no longer existed, but the habits remained. Where war's damage becomes permanent. The behaviors required to survive extreme combat, self-erasure, relentless function, emotional shutdown, do not turn off automatically. Societies celebrate the outcomes while ignoring the cost of installing those behaviors in human beings. Metals acknowledge performance, not repair. Stallone's death later was not tragic irony or poetic fate, it was continuation. When the system again demanded movement under fire, again demanded exposure to preserve others, he responded the same way. This time, there was no margin left. War does not reward consistency with survival. It only rewards it with temporary results. The real lesson of the two-gun trick is not about clever tactics or individual greatness. It is about thresholds. There is a point in combat where preservation becomes irrelevant and function becomes absolute. Past that point, ethics narrow, fear becomes background noise, and the body becomes a tool. Whoever holds that threshold longer determines the outcome. Infantry prefers clean narratives, battles reduced to dates, men reduced to quotes. But the truth is messier and colder. Henderson Field was held because one man refused to allow mechanical silence. That refusal kept an airfield alive. That airfield kept aircraft flying. Those aircraft shaped an entire campaign. War is not decided in headquarters. It is decided at the moment when something should stop working and someone forces it to continue anyway. It's not glory. That is cost. And that cost does not end when the firing stops. What is rarely discussed is that war does not simply demand sacrifice in the moment. It reprograms behavior. To survive nights like Henderson Field, a human being must learn to override instincts that exist for survival in normal life. Pain becomes background information. Fear becomes noise. Self-preservation becomes negotiable. The mind learns that stopping is more dangerous than damage, that hesitation is worse than injury, that continuing is the only safe option. Lessons do not disappear when the war ends. They linger because they worked. The logic was brutally consistent. When pressure increased, he increased output. When resources vanished, he substituted himself. When safety procedures failed, he replaced them with endurance. That logic saved lives and held ground, but it also narrowed his identity to a single function: keep the system alive at any cost. Modern societies like to believe they can separate wartime behavior from peacetime life. They cannot. You cannot ask someone to operate beyond human limits, reward them for it, and then expect them to return unchanged. The nervous system does not distinguish between necessary trauma and unnecessary trauma. It only remembers what it learned under threat. Why many veterans struggle not because they are broken, but because they are still optimized for an environment that no longer exists. The habits that once ensured survival, hyperfocus, emotional suppression, risk tolerance become liabilities in civilian life. War teaches clarity through danger. Peace offers ambiguity without consequence. The transition is not relief. It is disorientation. Stallone's discomfort during his Bond tour was not modesty, it was alienation. Applause made no sense to someone whose internal value system measured worth in minutes of sustained fire and ground not lost. Crowds celebrated an outcome without understanding the mechanism. The story had been sanitized. The burns were invisible. The machine guns were gone. Requested to return to combat, the decision baffled outsiders but followed the same internal logic that governed him at Henderson Field. In war, cause and effect were immediate. Actions mattered instantly. In peace, meaning was delayed, abstract, and symbolic. For someone conditioned to function under extreme pressure, that environment felt unreal. There's another uncomfortable truth. War can become psychologically coherent in a way. Peace is not Not because war is good, but because it is brutally simple. Do this or people die. Keep this running or everything collapses. There is no ambiguity, no moral gray zone in the moment of action, only necessity. Coherence is addictive not emotionally, but structurally. It gives the mind a framework where effort always matters. Peace does not guarantee that. In peace, effort can be wasted. In war, effort is never irrelevant. It either works or it doesn't, and the feedback is immediate. Tragedy is that the same clarity that makes war survivable makes it incompatible with long-term human well-being. Stallone's final actions on Iwo Jima followed the same pattern as Guadalcanal: movement under fire, exposure to protect others, function over safety. The environment again demanded the same response, and he delivered it without hesitation. This time, the system consumed him completely. It is not fate. It is system logic, War does not single out heroes to spare or destroy. It simply applies pressure until components fail. Some fail early, some fail late. Survival is not a moral verdict, it is a timing outcome. Reframes how we should understand heroism. Basilone was not heroic because he was exceptional as a man. He was heroic because he absorbed pressure that would otherwise have been distributed across many others. He concentrated failure into himself so the system around him could continue functioning. It is the darkest form of competence, becoming the point of failure so others do not have to. The two-gun trick was therefore not cleverness or improvisation. It was acceptance. Acceptance that no relief was coming. Acceptance that the system required a human substitute. Acceptance that stopping was worse than damage. Once that acceptance was made, everything else followed logically. He often asks why certain battles mattered. Henderson Field mattered not because of ideology or symbolism, but because it demonstrated how fragile outcomes really are. Entire campaigns hinge on whether a few machines keep working through the night, whether a single individual refuses to let silence happen. It is not comforting. It means wars are not won by destiny or righteousness, but by who can endure degradation longer, who can tolerate loss of safety margins, who can operate when there is no buffer left. The lesson is not that people should aspire to this. The lesson is that war requires this and any society that enters war must accept that it is asking some individuals to go far beyond what is recoverable. Stallone's story endures because it exposes that truth without decoration. No miracle, no clever reversal, just continuity under collapse. The machine gun that should have gone silent did not. One night, that was enough. That night also exposes a deeper, often ignored reality about modern conflict. War is less about defeating the enemy than about outlasting degradation. Every army enters battle with plans, doctrine, and assumptions. Combat exists to destroy those assumptions faster than replacements can be made. Henderson Field, both sides degraded rapidly. Japanese formations lost cohesion with each failed assault. American defenses lost manpower, ammunition, and equipment integrity. The question was never who was stronger at the start of the night. The question was who would still function when both sides were stripped down to bare essentials. What remained was not ideology or courage, but mechanical continuity supported by human endurance. This is why the phrase "held the line" is misleading. A line is not a place, it is a process. It exists only as long as weapons fire, ammunition moves, communications work, and men remain conscious. When any of those processes stop, the line ceases to exist instantly. There is no gradual collapse, there is only failure. Stallone's actions illustrate a critical asymmetry in warfare. Defensive systems punish attackers exponentially. Once attackers lose momentum, but defenders collapse catastrophically once continuity breaks. An attacker can lose hundreds and still attack again. A defender can lose one key position and lose everything. Asymmetry explains why Basilone treated silence as the ultimate threat. A jam was not an inconvenience. It was an existential danger. A pause invited approach. Approach invited grenades. Grenades invited annihilation. The entire defensive geometry depended on uninterrupted fire. This kind of thinking is not instinctive. Humans are wired to withdraw from pain, to protect damaged parts, to pause when injured. War demands the opposite. It rewards those who can override biological warning signals long enough to maintain output. That does not make them superior humans. It makes them temporarily incompatible with their own biology. The military often describes this as discipline. In reality, it is conditional self-destruction applied for a limited purpose. The danger lies in what happens after. A level that ignoring pain, fatigue, and fear leads to survival, that lesson becomes difficult to unlearn. The nervous system records it as truth. In civilian life, that same lesson produces burnout, detachment, and risk-seeking behavior. The environment changes, but the internal logic does not. Why societies struggle to reintegrate veterans without reducing them to symbols. Symbols are static, people are not. A symbol does not wake up at night remembering heat on skin. A symbol does not scan crowds for threats. A symbol does not feel useless when there is no system demanding sacrifice. Celebrating heroism without acknowledging adaptation costs, societies create a second betrayal after the battlefield. The first betrayal is asking someone to exceed human limits. The second is pretending those limits were never crossed. Stallone's discomfort with fame was not humility, it was misalignment. The story people told about him did not match the reality he lived. They wanted bravery. He knew it had been necessity. They wanted inspiration. He remembered compulsion. Mismatch is not accidental, it is structural. Societies need simplified narratives to justify war. Complexity undermines consensus. So stories are compressed. Pain is omitted. Systems are personified. A man becomes the explanation for a campaign because campaigns are too complex and too morally ambiguous to explain honestly. Henderson Field resists simplification. Remove the machine guns, and the story collapses. Remove the logistics, and the heroism becomes irrelevant. Remove the endurance, and the outcome reverses. This is why mechanized warfare is fundamentally impersonal. Individuals matter only insofar as they keep systems running. Basilone mattered because he replaced missing redundancy. He became the spare part. Is not a role anyone should envy. Think about military innovation. The two-gun trick was not innovation. It was exploitation of redundancy under pressure. Innovation implies choice. Basilone had none. He used what remained. That distinction matters because it separates cleverness from desperation. Most battlefield tricks emerge not from creativity, but from constraint. When resources disappear, the only option is recombination. People mistake this for genius because they observe the outcome without experiencing the pressure. Henderson Field teaches anything durable. It is that systems fail faster than people expect, and people fail faster than systems designers plan for. The gap between those two failure curves is where outcomes are decided. Stallone operated inside that gap. He managed it by absorbing it personally. That bought time. Time allowed dawn. Dawn allowed reinforcement. Reinforcement allowed survival. Survival allowed the campaign to continue. Reactions like this are invisible in real time. No one in the gun pit knew they were shaping a campaign. They knew only that stopping meant death. History assigns meaning afterward. Combat provides none. Understanding also explains why wars often end abruptly once a tipping point is reached. Systems degrade gradually, then collapse suddenly. From the outside, it looks surprising. From the inside, it feels inevitable. Henderson Field came close to that edge. A few more jams, a few fewer belts, a few minutes less endurance, and the outcome reverses completely. Mystical separates victory from defeat, only margins. This is why modern militaries obsess over redundancy, reliability, and logistics more than bravery. Courage is assumed, it is abundant. Systems are scarce. Endurance under failure is rarer still. Stallone's story endures not because it is uplifting, but because it is honest about that scarcity. It shows what happens when redundancy disappears and a human being is forced to replace it. It shows the cost of keeping a system alive when it should collapse. Cost is not fully payable. It is deferred. When people say war is hell, they often mean violence. Henderson Field shows something worse. Necessity without alternatives. The absence of choice. The removal of moral comfort. The moment when continuing is the only rational option, regardless of consequence. Is the real horror, not the killing, but the logic that makes self-destruction sensible. And that logic does not disappear when the guns stop. Who learned it the hard way, shaping decisions, relationships, and identities long after the battlefield is gone. Societies benefit from that learning, while pretending it does not exist. Stallone's life and death expose that contradiction. He was praised for enduring what no one should have to endure. He was celebrated for behavior that no healthy society should require. And when he died, the story closed neatly, sparing everyone the discomfort of asking what was taken from him long before. Henderson Field was held because a machine gun did not go silent. But the deeper lesson is this: every time a system demands that level of endurance, it is consuming something that cannot be fully replaced. Cost accumulates quietly, invisibly, long after the victory is declared. And eventually, it comes due. Forward. Johnson could hear it knocking, coughing, sounding wrong in every way that mattered, but it ran. Mayer attacked again. From the side, a sweeping deflection shot designed to rake the aircraft from nose to tail. Tracers stitched across the wings. Fuel tanks ruptured and vented harmlessly into the slipstream. Aluminum skin peeled back, exposing internal spars. Control cables snapped. The stick went soft in Johnson's hands. The P-47 was barely flying now, held aloft by momentum and stubborn design rather than control. Mayer emptied everything. Cannon, machine guns, every remaining round poured into the Thunderbolt. The sky filled with metal fragments and cordite smoke. Johnson waited for the moment when the wing would finally fail, or the engine would explode. It never came. Firing stopped. The Fire 190 slid alongside once more. Mayer looked again, longer this time. What he saw defied his understanding of air combat. The Thunderbolt was shredded beyond reason, yet still airborne, still moving west. Mayer rocked his wings in salute and turned away for good. His ammunition was gone. The fight was over. Johnson watched the German fighter disappear, then focused on the only thing left that mattered: getting home. The Channel was still ahead. The aircraft had no hydraulics, no flaps, no brakes, and barely any control. But it flew. Mile after mile, the wounded Thunderbolt carried its pilot toward England. What happened that day spread quickly through the Luftwaffe. Pilots reported hitting P-47 seconds until their guns ran dry, only to watch them keep flying. The aircraft engineers had called too heavy to dogfight revealed its true purpose. It was not built to dance. It was built to endure. By the time the English coastline appeared through the shredded windscreen, Johnson was no longer fighting the enemy. He was fighting